the more I think about it and the way my life has turned out, the more I'm convinced that chance must be the logic of God. You know, we've often talked about making important decisions in life, whether that's marriage, whether that's priesthood, whether that's to decide to go on and pursue an education, or for that matter, whether it's something as simple as just buying a washing machine. You know, it's funny, I often think about the fact that sometimes we put more research into doing something very simple like that, buying a new product, buying a car, than we do into planning a marriage, you know? But the reality is that so often in our lives, the surprises in our lives turn out to be the directions the Lord wants us to go. I'm sure that when Levi woke up that morning, the last thing he would have thought is that he was going to be an apostle. He probably didn't even know who Jesus was. And all of this was just by chance. Let me tell you about a chance that happened in my ancestral past, and that was the way my father happened to meet my mother. The night that they were to meet, my mother was home. She was in Oklahoma City studying dietetics. She came from Dubuque, Iowa, went down to Oklahoma City to study dietetics. And that night, she and her roommate Jen, was a very rainy night, and the last thing they wanted to do was to go out. But my mother's roommate Jen said, "Come on, Elaine, we got to go out. We can't just be sticks in the mud and stay in tonight. You know, they have this dance going on at the officers' club." Turns out my father was an officer's candidate school at the time, so we got into I guess it was the USO. But at any rate, my mother said, well, okay. So they went to the club, and there they were, and my father was the first to notice my mother from the back. And he liked the fact that she had this red auburn flowing hair. So he said, you know, maybe I'll ask her for a dance. But he said, maybe I better go around and look at the front because I've been burnt before. So he went around and he looked at my mother. He said, oh yeah, she looks good. And so he asked her for a dance, and they danced. And of course, the first thing they got out of the way in those days was, are you Catholic? Are you Catholic? It was very important, you know. And so, well, that's the way it started. And I'm thinking to myself, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that dance. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Jen. I wouldn't be here today if my father, and he was from Brooklyn. How did they get together in Oklahoma City on that date? You know, as I say, chance may be the logic of God, and I see the Holy Spirit and all of that. But I look through my own life and I see how many things really did happen very, very surprisingly. When people ask, how did you come to be a priest? You know, I can't say that I got a revelation from heaven. All of a sudden it came to me. In fact, when I first thought, man, maybe I do want to be a priest, I think I might have been in the latter part of my grammar school at that point. You know, I was buying macaroni salad, to tell you the truth, in the store, and the first person I think I told was the lady behind the counter. You know, I said, I think I might want to be a priest, you know, and she said, oh no, Eddie, you should get married, you'd have children, you'd be a great father. And you know what, that kind of stuck in my mind, because I never saw being a priest as different from being a father, to be quite honest with you. You know, I was probably a little too young to worry about the celibacy thing at that point, because I was only in the 6th grade. I know children today are a little more precocious, but the reality was that I never saw this as different from living a normal life. Now, a lot of people look at priests and sisters and say they're not normal. I know, but the reality is, who of us is really normal? You know, well, we all have a little craziness in us, right? And if you're not sure about that, ask the person next to you. They know, but. The reality is, you know, it is so surprising the way God works. And I could tell you many other stories like this. You have stories. Our stories are the greatest things. Sometimes we're embarrassed to talk about them because we feel, oh, well, if they really knew. But the reality is that some of the quirkiest things in our lives are the way we most relate to other people. And we shouldn't be afraid of those things. We shouldn't be afraid of telling those stories. I remember when I went on into the seminary, and at one point we were getting to the point where we would be assigned to the major seminary. And I remember I got a call one day to go to the rector's office around that time. And I figured, oh my God, they're going to throw me out. Because in those days we had a lot of vocations. And usually to get called into the rector's office meant it was something bad, not something good. And it was at that point that he said, well, I think The faculty thinks you'd be a good candidate to send to Rome. That's how I got to North American College. So figure that one out. I ended up going there. I thought I was being thrown out the same day. And much of the time, but you know, that story, that pattern has continued throughout my life. I never expected I was going to be a bishop. I never looked at that as being something that was viable. And then, of course, when I got the call, you know how that happened too. I was at my parents' house. It was on, you know, bishop is kind of a vocation too. It's another stage of the priesthood, I guess. And I remember I was taking a nap in the afternoon. I got a call from my friend, Monsignor Marchese, who worked at the Apostolic Nuncio. And I hadn't spoken to him in years. He has a voice a little bit like, sorry, Rich, if you're looking in, like Ratso Rizzo, you know. He's got a real Brooklyn accent, you know. Hey, Eddie, how you doing? Haven't talked in years, you know. So we did small talk for a while. I knew he was calling from Washington. I saw the 202 number come up. And so I put in my iPhone 202, you know, and I put his number in. You never know, I might need it again someday. So he said, talk small talk, and said, you know, in a little while a priest is going to call you up. And I got a little nervous at that point, and what did I think? Gee, what did I do? You know, because you get a call from Washington, something must be wrong. And so I put the number in. I thought, well, maybe they want me to do something with canon law or marriage tribunals because I had worked in the tribunal for years. So, yeah, I'll help out. Put the phone down. 15 minutes later, I see his number comes up again, Monsignor Marchese, 202, and picked up the phone, and I said something like, what the hell do you want now? Didn't we just talk? Instead, it turns out, is this Monsignor Scharfenberger? Turned out it was Archbishop Vigano, you know, and of course he announces to me that Pope Francis has decided, for whatever reason, that he wants you to be Bishop of Albany. You know, like most other bishops that get that call, I thought it was a joke. And again, it's another example of, you know, how God just works to us with us in surprising ways. So here's the message I really want to convey. You know, the craziest thing that you may think God is going to ask you to do that you would never even dream would happen, that surprise may be exactly what the Lord wants you to do. And whether that's the call to marriage, the priesthood, or religious life, don't brush it off because it's crazy, because this is the way the Lord's will is often done. The biggest problem, I think, in our lives is that we just don't think God would act in our lives in this way. You know, we don't feel worthy. You know, in fact, they do all these surveys, and they find out that one of the main reasons why people decide not to get married, take that big step, not to become a priest, not to become a religious, not to become a deacon, is fear of ourselves. Fear that I'm not worthy. Fear that I'm a dunce and God wouldn't want a jerk like me. Those kind of things that pull us down. And unfortunately, it also happens even when we are in our ministries. Priests, religious, parish leaders often feel, well, that's too much for me. It's beyond me to be able to inspire anybody to do something so important. God wouldn't pick a schmuck like me. You know, God writes straight and crooked lines. God has ways of choosing the weak and making them strong. And one of perhaps the greatest signs of the saints are that they know they're unworthy. They know that without the Lord they would never be where they were. It's not because they're better than anybody else. It's because they trusted. They trusted that God would make out of this clay that we are something very, very beautiful. But God, after all, is an artist. God is an artisan. Lovers are that way. Lovers, you know, they always say about, you know, what do you see in him? What do you see in her? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And God sees tremendous beauty in each and every one of us because he loves us. And that's perhaps the most difficult thing we do, is accepting being accepted, accepting being loved. Levi probably would have, his name wasn't Matthew, Levi probably could have said, I'm just a tax collector. You know, you were assumed to be a sinner then as now, if you're into taxes. You know, his big banquet that he probably gave, you know, ill-gotten gains. He could have said, no, not me. But something about Jesus' love, I think, must have persuaded him that, you know what, I'll follow him. And he left everything to follow Jesus. And it changed his life. And it changed our lives and the life of the church. And so too will Jesus continue to change our lives. He'll meet us where we are. And our prayer today, this is my prayer for all of us today, let's say yes. You've said yes to be here today. We've said yes to promote and to encourage vocations, and to all of those who are listening, to all of those whom we go. Let's pray that we will give the Lord a big yes. He deserves this. He loves us so much. Let's not be afraid. And remember, God writes straight and crooked lines. Chance may just be the logic of God.